A minute before the wedding, she discovered the shocking truth about her fiancé. Her revenge stunned everyone. In a snow-white restrictive dress, Caitlin pressed herself against the doorframe, trying to stifle her sobs. Behind the thin wooden door, she could hear carefree laughter. It was Jacob, her fiancé, and his friends, Matt and Liam. What she saw shocked her, but she was even more confused by the behavior of her friends and Jacob after what had happened. It was this blatant, carefree attitude, this happiness that she was supposed to share, that made her pain unbearable. The feeling of betrayal that she had so carefully hidden from everyone was now suffocating her. But to understand how she had reached this point, standing on the threshold of her own nightmare, it was necessary to go back to the very beginning. The life of little Lily, who had just turned 8, had always been difficult. She grew up in silence and loneliness, which had been her constant companions since her mother's death. Her father, always busy with his work, paid her little attention, and the rest of the time the girl spent with a nanny who was too cold to replace her mother. Lily's only joy was her old, worn teddy bear, a gift from her mother. She never parted with him, hugging him close when she was scared and telling him her little secrets. One day, during one of the rare family dinners, her father announced that he was getting married. He said that the new woman in their lives would bring them happiness and that they would become a real family. But to Lily, it sounded like a death sentence. She looked longingly at Caitlin, the young, beautiful woman who was to become her stepmother. Caitlin was kind to her, always trying to smile and play with her. But Lily couldn't accept her. The girl felt like a traitor to her real mother, and her heart was full of resentment. With each new encounter, Caitlin seemed more and more like a stranger. But the biggest blow for Lily was the news that they were moving to a new house. A big, strange, empty house, with nothing to remind her of her mother. The old wallpaper, the familiar smell, even the crack in the wall in her room. All of it was part of her life, her memories, and now it was all gone, replaced by something new and soulless. Lily cried more and more at night, clutching her teddy bear and praying for everything to go back to the way it was. Caitlin tried to talk to her to find out what was bothering her, but Lily just turned away, hiding her face in her teddy bear, and remained silent. Caitlin was at a loss. She didn't know how to reach the girl's heart. She didn't know that the pain she saw in Lily's eyes was just a reflection of her own. The pain she hid from everyone, even Jacob, believing that he wouldn't understand. Caitlin thought their happiness would be as simple as 2 + 2, but life, as always, turned out to be much more complicated. Caitlin believed that moving into a new home would be a fresh start for them. For her, it wasn't just a change of address, but a symbol of the new life she so desperately wanted to build with Jacob and his daughter. She imagined them together, furnishing this spacious, bright house and filling it with laughter and warmth. She tried especially hard for Lily. Caitlin chose the wallpaper for her room with great care, buying a new bed with a castle headboard and star-shaped pillows, hoping that the girl would feel happy and wanted there. She wanted this room to be her little refuge, where she could feel safe. But Lily didn't appreciate her efforts. She sat on her new, soft bed, clutching her old, worn teddy bear, which seemed to be the only familiar object in this perfect, unfamiliar room. There was no joy in her eyes, only longing and wariness. Caitlin felt guilty, as if she had stolen something important from the girl, even though she had wanted to give her everything. Her hope slowly faded. One day, Caitlin brought a large box full of bright posters with unicorns and rainbows. She sincerely believed that it would help. "I thought you'd like these," Caitlin said with a smile. "We can decorate the walls." But Lily didn't even look at the posters. Her indifference was sharp as a knife. "No," the girl replied quietly. Caitlin felt the smile slip from her face. She dropped the box on the floor, and the sound of it landing seemed deafening. She sat down on the edge of the bed, trying to look calm, but inside, she was crumbling. "Lily, I understand that this is hard for you." Her voice was soft, but there was a hint of desperation in it. "But we can try to make this room yours. You said you like to paint. We can buy you an easel and some paints, and you can—" "No, don't," Lily interrupted, burying her face in the teddy bear. "I don't want anything. I want everything to be the way it was before." That, like before, sounded like a reproach to Caitlin, like a reminder that she was a stranger, a substitute, a temporary figure who could never take the place of a real mother. At that moment, Caitlin didn't see Lily as a hurt child. She saw a mirror that reflected her own fears and insecurities. She herself was a person without a past, without a strong family, and her desire to create one was so strong that she didn't notice how she was putting pressure on those around her. In the evenings, when Lily was already asleep, Caitlin shared her feelings with Jacob. "She hates me," she said, and there was pain in her voice. "I can't get through to her. It seems like everything I do just makes it worse." Jacob hugged her, trying to calm her down. "Give her time, Caitlin. She just misses her mom. She'll get used to it. You're so kind. She'll love you." But Jacob's words, though kind, didn't help. He didn't understand that her pain wasn't just the girl's rejection. This pain was much deeper. It was part of her very being. Her own childhood had been full of disappointment, and she had always dreamed of a family, of a home where love would reign instead of coldness. She thought that with Jacob and Lily, she would finally find it. But now she saw that the past was haunting her, that it would not let her or Lily go. With each passing day, the wedding seemed less like the beginning of a new life, and more like the last chance she might ever have. She stood at the threshold, but she didn't feel like a bride ready to step into happiness. She felt like a person stuck between two worlds. The days dragged on slowly. After that conversation about the posters, a tense silence settled between Caitlin and Lily that was worse than any argument. Lily avoided her gaze, preferring to spend time in her room, and Caitlin, not wanting to push her further, left the girl alone. She tried to create the appearance of a normal life. She cooked breakfast and dinner and went grocery shopping. But it was all just an imitation of a family filled with nothing but empty rituals. The house that was supposed to be their refuge now felt like a battlefield, with each side entrenched in their own emotions. Caitlin felt the distance between her and Lily growing every day, and no words could bridge it. The day before the wedding, they went to try on dresses for Lily. Caitlin ordered a small, elegant dress for her, an exact copy of her own, only without the long train. She thought it would be a symbol of their unity, of their new family. But, like everything else, this idea turned into another disappointment. Lily stood in front of the mirror in a white dress that was too big for her, looking like a little wax figure. There was no emotion on her face. "Do you like it, sweetie?" Caitlin asked, trying to sound as gentle as possible. Lily didn't answer. She just stared at her reflection, and in her eyes, Caitlin saw only cold alienation. This wasn't a child, it was a ghost that reminded her of her own pain, of her own childhood, when she was never bought pretty dresses. She thought that by giving this to Lily, she would make up for her own pain, but the girl only pushed her away. Jacob, who had arrived at the end of the fitting, tried to lighten the mood. He walked over to Lily, crouched down, and stroked her hand. "Look how beautiful you are," he said with a beaming smile, "just like a real princess." Lily flinched and pulled her hand away. "I don't want to wear this," she said quietly. Lily's words hit Caitlin like a blow. She felt her cheeks flush. She felt ashamed and hurt. She glanced at Jacob and saw confusion in his eyes. He didn't understand what was going on. "Lily, that's enough," he said, his voice stern. "That dress is very beautiful, and you will wear it. Stop behaving like this." The girl shook her head. I don't want to be like her." She pointed at Caitlin. Caitlin felt everything inside her break. She took a few steps back, trying to hold back the tears, but they were already forming a lump in her throat. Jacob tried to say something, but Caitlin waved her hand, indicating that she couldn't stay there any longer. She ran out of the studio, leaving the two of them behind, and got into the car. When Jacob came out a few minutes later, his face was grim. He sat down next to her and was silent for a long time. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I'll talk to her. She shouldn't have behaved like that." But Caitlin knew it wasn't Lily's behavior. It was about her. She was too much like her, like the little girl who had once been rejected. She wanted to be a mother, she wanted to be a wife, she wanted to be a family, but all she got in return was rejection. She began to doubt herself, her abilities, her right to happiness. Lily's voice echoed in her head over and over again, saying, "I don't want to be like her." And at that moment, Caitlin realized that this phrase hurt her not because of Lily, but because she herself did not know who she really was. The evening before the wedding should have been filled with joy and anticipation, but for Caitlin, it felt like a long goodbye. She insisted on spending the night at her friend's house, away from Jacob, and, more importantly, away from Lily. She didn't want to see his clumsy attempts to comfort her or her cold aloofness. She needed to be alone to sort out her thoughts, which were tangled in a tight, unravelable knot. Caitlin sat in the guest bedroom, leaning her back against the cold wall, staring into the darkness outside the window. The house she was supposed to move into was also silent, but it was a different kind of silence, oppressive and heavy. Here, in this unfamiliar but peaceful place, she felt like she could finally breathe. But the peace was only an illusion. Lily's words echoed in her head. "I don't want to be like her." Those words hurt more than any slap. She knew the girl had said it in a fit of anger, but they hit home. Caitlin had spent her whole life trying to be somebody, trying to be better. She grew up in a family where she wasn't considered special. Her parents were busy with their own lives, and she often felt like she didn't belong. They didn't buy her dresses for school dances or praise her for her achievements at school, and all her life she tried to prove to herself and others that she was worth something, that she was worthy of love, worthy of being the center of attention, and marrying Jacob, who was so sincerely in love with her, seemed like the culmination of that struggle. But now that Lily had rejected her, now that she had failed to win the little girl's trust, it was all falling apart. Caitlin stood up and walked over to the closet, where her wedding dress hung on a hanger. It seemed as foreign and out of place as the whole situation. The silk, pearls, and lace were all luxurious, but they didn't belong to her. It was just a beautiful shell hiding a wounded and insecure woman. Caitlin ran her hand over the fabric, and the tears she had held back for so long finally fell. She wasn't crying out of anger at Lily, but out of pity for herself. Out of pity for the little girl she once was and the woman she had become. She cried out of fear for tomorrow, for a future that had suddenly become so uncertain. At that moment, Jacob was also pacing around his house, unable to find a place for himself. He tried to talk to Lily, but she wouldn't come out of her room. He knocked on the door, trying to explain how important this wedding was to him, how much he wanted them all to be happy, but there was only silence in response. He felt Lily drifting away, and it broke his heart. He loved Caitlin, he loved his daughter, but he didn't know how to bring these two worlds together, which seemed impossible to coexist. He felt powerless and helpless. He called Caitlin, but she didn't answer. He left her a voicemail apologizing for everything, for Lily, for not being able to fix things. Meanwhile, Lily lay in her room in the dark, clutching her teddy bear. She could hear her dad knocking on her door. She could hear him talking, but she couldn't answer. There was no anger in her head. There was only pain. She missed her mom, and everything that was happening seemed like a betrayal to her. She didn't want her dad to be happy with someone else. She wanted him to be with her, so they could miss their mom together. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving wet trails on the old, worn fur of her teddy bear. Tomorrow would be a new day, and she knew it wouldn't change anything. After tomorrow, their lives would never be the same. Caitlin stared out the window. The first rays of dawn were shining through the curtains, illuminating her dress. The clock read 11:37. The ceremony was supposed to start at 11:45. She was supposed to be the happiest woman in the world, but she felt like the unhappiest. She picked up her phone to check the time and saw a message from Jacob. She didn't open it. She didn't want to hear his words. She just wanted it all to end. She slowly got up and looked in the mirror, seeing a tearful, unhappy bride who was about to take a fateful step. 11:44. Caitlin stood in the small room intended for the bride and tried to pull herself together. Her hands trembled as she clutched a bouquet of white roses, their petals seeming so fragile and innocent. Through the door she could hear music, soft, solemn, joyful. It was her wedding music, but instead of happiness, there was only anxiety in her heart. She heard voices and laughter, and every sound was like a stab, reminding her that she was all alone in her grief. The music in the hall fell silent, giving way to the solemn silence that preceded the bride's entrance. Caitlin stood behind the door, feeling her heart pound in her chest. She was ready, but not for happiness, but for a fateful step. She could hear the guests whispering behind the door, Jacob talking quietly with his friends. Her hands trembled as she clutched the bouquet, and tears welled up in her eyes again. At that moment, through a small crack in the door, she saw Jacob. He was standing at the altar, but his gaze was fixed on the corner of the hall, where Lily's small figure was huddled against the wall. Jacob's face, which had been beaming just a moment ago, suddenly contorted with rage. He didn't say a word, but his body tensed and he moved forward, ignoring the puzzled looks of Matt and Liam. Caitlin didn't immediately understand what was happening. She thought he was going to talk to Lily to calm her down. But as he approached the girl, his face grew angrier and angrier. Lily, seeing him, shuddered and cowered. Jacob stopped right in front of her, his voice usually soft and gentle, now harsh and rough. "What are you standing there like a statue?" he hissed. "You're embarrassing me. Can't you smile? Can't you at least pretend you're happy?" Lily was silent, only her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. This enraged Jacob even more. He looked at her with such malice that even Caitlin, standing behind the door, felt a chill. "What's wrong with you? You're just a selfish little brat. You're ruining my life, just like you ruined your mother's," he shouted, his words echoing throughout the hall, silencing the shocked guests. Jacob raised his hand, ready to strike, and at that moment, Matt and Liam, who had been standing frozen, rushed toward him. "Jacob, stop!" Matt shouted, grabbing his arm. "Don't, buddy," Liam added, holding him from the other side. "Calm down." Jacob struggled, his face red with rage, his eyes filled with nothing but disappointment. "What are you doing? It's her fault. She's disgracing us," he shouted, trying to break free. Caitlin, stunned by what was happening, was paralyzed. This was not the man she had fallen in love with. This was not the perfect father she had seen before. This was a stranger, full of rage, who was ready to hit his own child at his own wedding. At that moment, the whole world she had so carefully built collapsed. All his words about love and family were just empty sounds. Behind the facade of the perfect man was a cruel and selfish person. Her heart was filled not only with pain, but also with anger. She no longer felt like a bride. She no longer felt like a victim. She felt like a protector. The door that was supposed to be her passage to a new, happy life now seemed like a way out of a cage. She had to take a step, not toward the altar, but toward the little girl who was cowering in the corner, trying to shut herself off from the world. Caitlin stepped into the hall, and her dress, which had seemed so heavy before, now felt like light armor. All the eyes on her meant nothing. She no longer felt like a bride, no longer felt like the center of attention. She felt like a protector. Her gaze was fixed on the corner where Matt and Liam were still holding back an enraged Jacob, and next to him, curled up and crying, was Lily. Caitlin walked past the guests, past the benches, past the flowers that now seemed so out of place. She approached Lily, knelt down, and gently took her hand. The girl flinched but did not pull away. "Let's go," Caitlin said quietly. "We're leaving." Lily looked up at her with tear-filled eyes, full of fear and confusion. "What about Daddy?" she whispered. "Daddy is staying here," Caitlin replied, and there was not a hint of regret in her voice. At that moment, Jacob finally broke free from his friend's grip. His eyes were filled with rage and anger. "Caitlin, what are you doing? Get back where you were. You're ruining everything," he shouted. Caitlin stood up, holding Lily close to her. She looked at Jacob, and there was no fear in her eyes. "I'm not ruining anything, Jacob." Her voice was firm, and each word was like a blow. "I'm just ending what should never have started. I'm not marrying a man who is willing to raise his hand to his own child." Jacob froze. His rage suddenly turned to cold, calculating anger. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Caitlin just shook her head. "I know, and that's enough." She took Lily by the hand and turned toward the exit. Liam and Matt, who had been holding Jacob back, stood frozen, not knowing what to do. The guests whispered, trying to understand what had happened. Some looked on with disapproval, others with sympathy. But Caitlin didn't care. She led Lily away from this nightmare. When they left the hall, Caitlin stopped. She looked at her dress, at the veil that was still pinned to her hair. She unfastened the veil and threw it on the ground. She was no longer a bride. "Where are we going?" Lily asked, her voice barely audible. Caitlin didn't know. She didn't know where they would go, what they would do, how they would live. She had nothing but this dress and a little girl clinging to her like a lifeline. But at that moment, it didn't matter. "Wherever we go," she replied, and despite all the uncertainty, there was hope in her voice. The important thing is that we're together. She looked at Lily, and in the girl's eyes, which were still full of fear, Caitlin saw something new. Trust. And that was enough. She had made her choice, and that choice was not about herself. It was about them. It was about starting over, with a clean slate, where there were no lies or hypocrisy, just the two of them. The cold, fresh air hit their faces as they stepped out of the mansion. The sounds of music and conversation remained behind the massive doors, as if in another world. Now there was only this world, a world of silence, where the only sound was their breathing, and the distant hum of cars. Lily held Caitlin's hand tightly, and Caitlin squeezed her palm tightly, as if afraid that the girl would disappear into thin air. Her dress, which had looked so solemn in the wedding hall, now seemed inappropriate and ridiculous. It restricted her movements, and her high-heeled shoes were not designed for walking on gravel. Caitlin stopped. She looked at Lily, at her small, tear-stained face, and a wave of fear rose in her heart again. What had she done? Where would they go? She had no plan, no money, nothing but this dress and a little girl clinging to her like a lifeline. She didn't even have a car. She had just walked away. She had followed her impulse, her heart telling her to save this child, but now her mind was screaming that she had made the biggest mistake of her life. "Where are we going, Caitlin?" Lily asked again, her voice so quiet, so full of despair that it was unbearable. Caitlin shook her head. "I don't know, sweetie, but we'll figure something out." She tried to smile, but it didn't work. She just stood there on the gravel path and waited for something to happen. And something did happen. The door of the mansion opened, and Liam appeared on the threshold. He looked embarrassed and confused. He quickly descended the steps and approached them. "Caitlin," he began, his voice soft and apologetic. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over him." Caitlin was silent. She just looked at him, and there was no judgment or anger in her gaze, only exhaustion. "We didn't know he was like that," Liam continued, his eyes falling on Lily. "He's never acted like this before. Please don't leave. We can help." Caitlin looked at Lily, who was hiding behind her dress. "What can you do?" she asked. "I can take you somewhere," Liam said. "Or you can stay with me. My wife is away. The house is empty. No one will find you there." Caitlin hesitated. She didn't know this man. He was Jacob's friend. She didn't know if she could trust him. But she had no choice. She had no other plan. She looked at Lily, who was still trembling. The girl needed warmth and safety, and Liam was offering that. "Are you sure?" she asked. Liam nodded. "More than sure. Jacob, what he did was wrong. I can't just leave you like this." In his eyes, Caitlin saw genuine sympathy. It wasn't the look Jacob had given her. It was the look of someone who saw the truth. "Okay," she said. "We'll go with you, but only for one night. And then we'll figure something out," Liam finished for her. He took her by the elbow and led them to his car, parked in the lot. Lily walked beside her, holding on to Caitlin. She didn't let go of her hand for a second, and at that moment, walking toward a stranger's car, Caitlin realized she had hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she was no longer alone. The ride in Liam's car was like a prolonged silence after a storm. No one said a word. Liam drove intently, occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror, as if to make sure no one was following them. Caitlin sat in the back seat, holding Lily close to her, who had fallen asleep as soon as the car started moving. She slept with her face buried in Caitlin's shoulder, her small, warm hand clutching her tightly. At that moment, Caitlin felt nothing but overwhelming exhaustion. Her head was heavy, her body ached from tension, and her thoughts were jumbled. The adrenaline that had kept her going during the whole nightmare had finally subsided, leaving behind a void. She stared out the window, watching the city lights flash by. They looked like fireflies guiding them into the unknown. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know what Jacob would say when his rage subsided. She knew only one thing. She had made the right choice. She had protected Lily. The car stopped at a small, cozy house surrounded by greenery. It was nothing like Jacob's mansion. It felt alive and warm. Liam got out of the car, opened the door for Caitlin, and helped her carry the sleeping Lily out. "Don't worry," he said, his voice soft. "My wife is away, so we're alone. No one will bother you." Caitlin nodded. She couldn't speak. She just followed him, holding Lily, who, despite her sleep, was still clutching her teddy bear tightly. The house was just like the outside. Imperfect, but lived in. There was a blanket on the sofa, a cup of half-drunk tea on the table, and the smell of baking wafted from the kitchen. Liam led them into the guest room. It was small but cozy, with a large bed and a warm blanket. Caitlin carefully laid Lily on the bed and helped her out of her dress. The girl, still asleep, buried her face in the pillow. Caitlin covered her with the blanket, and only then did she feel tears running down her cheeks again. But these were no longer tears of despair. These were tears of relief. Liam brought them a glass of water and a plate of cookies. "You must be hungry," he said. "Please, don't be shy. And don't worry, I won't tell anyone you're here." Caitlin looked up at him. "Why are you doing this, Liam?" Liam sat down on the edge of the bed, his face full of sadness. "Jacob, he's my best friend. But what he did, it was terrible. I can't excuse him, and I can't leave you like this. In trouble. You don't deserve this. Lily doesn't deserve this." His words were like balm to her wounded heart. She felt her own faith in people, which had been so cruelly trampled on, begin to return. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you for everything." Liam smiled. "You're welcome. Get some rest. If you need anything, I'm in the next room." He left, leaving them alone. Caitlin took off her dress, threw it on the floor, and lay down next to Lily without bothering to cover herself. She hugged her, and in that moment, she felt that her new life had begun. It was full of uncertainty, fear, and pain, but there was also hope. Hope that they would be able to get through everything because now they were together. She closed her eyes and finally fell asleep, feeling safe for the first time in a long time. Caitlin woke up to a ray of sunlight shining through the curtains. The first thing she saw was Lily's face, sleeping peacefully next to her. The girl looked so defenseless, so fragile, that Caitlin couldn't help but smile. She felt something new and unfamiliar rising in her heart. Not fear, not despair, but tenderness. She got up quietly, trying not to wake Lily, and left the room. The smell of coffee and fried bacon wafted from the kitchen. Liam was standing at the stove. His back relaxed. He turned when he heard Caitlin's footsteps and smiled. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft. "Did you sleep well?" Caitlin nodded. "Yes, thank you. For everything." Liam waved his hand. "You're welcome. I'm glad you're safe." He placed a cup of hot coffee and a plate of breakfast in front of her. Caitlin took the cup in her hands, warming her palms, and in that moment she felt reality bearing down on her again. She had nothing. No clothes, no ID, no money. She was in a strange house with a stranger, and she had a child in her arms. "Liam," she began, her voice uncertain. "What are we going to do? I have nothing." Liam sat down across from her, his face serious. "I know. We'll talk about everything. But first, you need to eat. Then we can go to the store and get you and Lily something. And then we'll call my lawyer." Lawyer. The word made Caitlin flinch. She didn't want a scandal. She didn't want a court case. She just wanted to disappear. I just want to leave," she said. "You can't just leave," Liam said. "Jacob will look for you. He won't let it go. He's too proud. He won't let himself be dumped like that, especially after what he did." Liam's words were like a cold shower. They brought her back down to earth. Caitlin looked at the phone on the table, and at that moment, it rang. She flinched. The number was unfamiliar. She looked at Liam, and he shook his head. "Don't answer it." But Caitlin, as if hypnotized, reached out and picked up the phone. The voice on the other end was Jacob's, but it wasn't the voice she had heard yesterday. It was a soft, apologetic voice, full of remorse. "Caitlin, sweetheart, it's me. Where are you? I've been so worried." Caitlin felt a shiver run through her body. She couldn't speak. "Honey, please come back," he continued. "I don't know what came over me. I was so upset, so angry. I don't know what was wrong with me. But I love you. I love Lily. It was all because of the stress. Please come back. We'll forget everything." He sounded so sincere that for a second Caitlin almost believed him. But then she remembered his face contorted with rage, his hand raised above Lily. And at that moment, she heard footsteps. Lily was standing in the doorway, holding her teddy bear. She looked at Caitlin with such fear in her eyes that Caitlin's heart sank. "I'm not coming back, Jacob," she said, her voice as hard as steel. "Never." She hung up the phone. She didn't want to listen to his lies anymore. She walked over to Lily, hugged her, and at that moment she knew that her choice wasn't just the right one. It was the only one she could make. She looked at Liam, and there was determination in her eyes. "I'm ready," she said. "Let's do this." Liam smiled. "Okay, breakfast first, then we'll make a plan." The morning at Liam's house was filled with a strange sense of normalcy. After a shower and breakfast, which Liam had prepared, Caitlin felt like a human being for the first time in a long time. She found some of Liam's old but clean clothes in one of the rooms. They were too big for her, but it was better than walking around in a wedding dress. She helped Lily change into a pair of children's pajamas that belonged to Liam's niece. Lily looked so small and vulnerable in the clothes that didn't fit her. There was no more fear on her face, only calm. They were sitting in the kitchen drinking hot tea when Liam brought a notebook and a pen. "We need to make a plan," he said, his voice quiet but confident. "The first thing we need to do is find you a good lawyer. My friend Mark is a family law specialist. He'll help." Caitlin nodded. The word lawyer still frightened her, but she understood that it was necessary. She couldn't just disappear. Jacob was too rich and powerful to let her get away with it. "He'll come looking for me," she said, her voice trembling. "Yes," Liam replied. "That's why we need a lawyer. He'll be your representative, he'll talk to Jacob, and he'll do everything he can to make sure he can't hurt you or Lily." Caitlin looked at Lily, who was sitting next to her, drawing in her notebook. The girl looked so small and fragile, and at that moment Caitlin realized that she had no right to give up. She had to fight. "What's next?" she asked. "We need to sort out the finances," Liam said. "Everything you had is with Jacob. We need access to your accounts." Caitlin shook her head. "I didn't have any accounts. I spent all the money I had on the wedding, on our future together. I have nothing left." Liam frowned. "Okay, then we'll do it differently. We can ask a lawyer to request reimbursement from him. I'm sure he doesn't want this story to become public knowledge." Caitlin looked at Lily again, then her gaze fell on the girl's drawing. It showed two people holding hands. One figure was larger than the other. Above them was the sun. "Are you drawing us?" Caitlin asked. Lily nodded. "It's us, and you won't leave me, will you?" Her voice was quiet. Caitlin hugged her. "Never, I promise." They sat like that for a few minutes, and in that moment, Caitlin felt that she had strength. She had someone to fight for. "Liam," she said, pulling away from Lily, "please call your lawyer. I'm ready." Liam smiled. "Okay, I'll call him now." He left the kitchen, leaving them alone. Caitlin took Lily's hand and looked at her drawing. It was two figures holding hands with the sun above them. At that moment, Caitlin knew that although the road ahead would be difficult, they would make it through, because now they were a team. The morning that began with hope quickly turned into tense reality. Liam, Caitlin, and Lily sat in Mark's office, the lawyer. He was like his friend, calm and level-headed, but his words hit hard. "We need to act immediately," Mark said, laying out documents on the table. "We're going to file for temporary custody on the grounds that the father is a danger to the child's life and health. It won't be easy. Jacob has no criminal record and is considered a respected member of the community. We'll need witness statements." He looked at Liam, who nodded. "I'm ready," he said. I saw him raise his hand to her. Mark nodded. "Good, that's our main weapon, but we need to be prepared for him to strike back. And he'll be vicious." At that moment, Mark's phone vibrated. He looked at the screen and his face darkened. "It's Jacob," he said. "He's not calling. He's texting. He's filed a report with the police about the kidnapping, and he has a warrant for your arrest, Caitlin." Mark's words were like a cold shower. Caitlin felt her heart sink into an abyss. She looked at Lily, who was sitting next to her, drawing. She couldn't let anything happen to her. She couldn't let them take her away. What should we do?" Caitlin asked. "We need to find you a safe place immediately," Mark said. "The police will be looking for you. They'll be looking for Lily. We have to hide." Caitlin felt a shiver run through her body. She wasn't ready for this. She thought they would fight it out in court, not go into hiding. "I can't," she said. "I can't. I can't make Lily live like a fugitive." At that moment, Liam's phone rang. He answered it, and his face darkened as well. "It's Matt," he said, hanging up. "Jacob is looking for you. He said if we don't turn you in, he'll destroy us. He said he'll make sure we never work again." Caitlin looked at Liam, then at Mark. Her world was falling apart. She had dragged not only herself into this nightmare, but her new friends as well. "We have an option," Mark said. "I have a cottage outside of town. No one will look for you there, and we can start gathering evidence from there. We have time. We have to use it." Caitlin hesitated. She didn't know what to do. She didn't want to risk Lily. She didn't want to risk Liam and Mark. But she had no choice. She looked at Lily, and there was no fear in her eyes. Only trust. And that was enough. "Okay," she said. "We'll go, but we'll fight. We won't just hide." Mark smiled. "I didn't expect anything else from you. Now we're a team, and we'll fight. But we have to be smarter than him." After talking to Mark and Liam, there was a strange but hopeful feeling in the air. They were no longer fugitives, cornered and on the run. The next few days turned into painstaking, nerve-wracking work. Caitlin, Liam, and Mark exchanged calls and messages using encrypted communication channels to avoid being tracked. They knew Jacob wouldn't give up. He was a man who was used to winning, and his pride wouldn't allow him to lose. Their first move was to strike at his reputation. Mark suggested finding as many witnesses as possible who could speak to Jacob's character, about his temper, his tendency toward violence, how he treated those who were weaker than him. Caitlin knew it wouldn't be easy. Jacob had always been skilled at hiding his cruelty behind a mask of perfection. But she remembered one incident. A few months before the wedding, she was with Jacob at a restaurant when a waiter accidentally spilled wine on his expensive shirt. Jacob didn't yell or swear, but the look in his eyes, it was so cold and inhumanly angry that Caitlin felt a chill run down her spine. He simply asked the manager to call the waiter and demanded that he be fired. Then, when the waiter left the room, Jacob smiled and said, "Don't worry, honey, he's just careless. We'll take care of him." Caitlin had chalked it up to stress at the time, but now she realized that it was just one of many examples of his true nature. Mark suggested finding the waiter. Liam used his connections to track him down. His name was Andrew. He said that Jacob had threatened him, saying that if he ever came near his restaurant again, he would make sure he never found work in the city again. That story was just the beginning. Meanwhile, Lily, who was spending her days in the cottage, started drawing. Her drawings, which had previously been full of joy, now featured dark, sinister figures that haunted her. She drew her dad yelling, raising his hand. And she drew Caitlin standing between her and her father, protecting her. Caitlin realized that these drawings could be important evidence. They were a reflection of her inner world, her fears that she couldn't express in words. One night, when Lily was asleep, Caitlin sat in the kitchen with Liam and Mark, discussing their next steps. Mark told them that Jacob, knowing he was being searched for, had started to take action. He had hired the best lawyers to create an image of a happy, loving father whose daughter had been kidnapped. "He'll try to make you look crazy," Mark said. "He'll say you kidnapped Lily to get back at him, that you're unstable, and that proves what he said about you not really loving Lily." Caitlin clenched her fists. She was ready to fight. She picked up one of Lily's drawings, which showed a little girl hiding behind a woman's back, and the sun trying to break through the dark clouds. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "Then we'll play by their rules. We'll show them the truth. Let him say what he wants. We'll be smarter. We'll be better." Two fires burned in the darkness of the forest, like sinister eyes. Caitlin instinctively pulled Lily closer, even though the girl was asleep in her room. Liam jumped up, his face tense. "It's them," he whispered, and there was no doubt in his voice. "Jacob found us." Mark, who had been sitting quietly, now looked like a man ready for battle. He stood up, went to the window, and peered out cautiously. "We have to go," he said, his voice firm. "Right now. I don't know how many of them there are, or if they're armed, but I'm not taking any chances." They moved quickly and efficiently. Liam grabbed his bag, Mark grabbed the folder with the documents, and Caitlin ran to Lily's room. The girl woke up, her eyes wide with fear. "What's going on?" she whispered. "Hush, sweetheart," said Caitlin. "We're just playing a game. Hide and seek." She quickly dressed Lily, picked her up, and carried her outside. The cold night air hit their faces. They ran to Mark's car, which was hidden behind the trees, but when they were almost there, it froze. Two lights in the forest suddenly became 3, then 4. They surrounded them. "The cottage. They're already there," Liam said. They had no choice but to run deeper into the forest. They ran as fast as they could, branches whipping their faces, tripping over tree roots, their hearts pounding in their chests like drums. Caitlin carried Lily in her arms. Her only thought was to save the little girl. In the distance, they heard voices. It wasn't Jacob's voice, but they were angry and harsh. They were looking for them. Just when they had almost lost hope, they saw a light. It was the light from a flashlight. They were frightened, but then they heard a familiar voice. "Caitlin, it's me, Matt," he shouted. Caitlin stopped, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't know if she could trust him, but she had no choice. She dragged Lily toward him. Matt looked exhausted. He crouched down to be at Lily's level and looked into her eyes. "Hi, Princess," he said, his voice soft. "I'm here to help. Jacob, he's gone crazy. He thinks you left him, and he wants Lily back. He's threatening everyone. Me, Liam. He said he'll destroy us if we don't find you." Caitlin felt tears running down her cheeks. She was so tired of being afraid. She looked at Matt, and she saw sincerity in his eyes. "We have to go," he said. "He hired private investigators. He knows Liam is helping you. He'll be here soon." Matt's car sped down the night highway. Dark silhouettes of trees flashed by the window, and a heavy silence reigned inside the car. Caitlin held sleeping Lily in her arms, who had finally calmed down and fallen asleep. A worn teddy bear was clutched in her small hands, and her breathing was steady and calm. But Caitlin couldn't sleep. Her heart was still pounding in her chest, and the voices that had haunted them in the forest echoed in her head. Mark, who was sitting next to Matt, was the first to break the silence. "Now you see," he said quietly. "He won't stop. He'll keep looking for you until he finds you. We can't keep hiding. We have to do something." Matt nodded. "He hired the best people," he said. "They know how to search. If we just run, they'll find us sooner or later." Caitlin, who had been silent until then, suddenly looked up. "Then we won't run." Her voice was as hard as steel. "We'll fight. We'll do what he never expects. We'll attack first." Mark and Matt exchanged glances. They hadn't expected such intensity from Caitlin, who had been confused and frightened just a moment ago. "What do you mean?" Mark asked. "He's trying to make himself out to be the victim," Caitlin said. "A loving father whose daughter was kidnapped." Liam, who was sitting in the front seat, turned to her. "You want to tell the press everything?" "Exactly," said Caitlin. "We'll tell them everything. How he raised his hand to Lily at his own wedding. How he threatened us. How he tried to find us. How he stalked us. We'll show people who he really is." Matt frowned. "That's risky, Caitlin. He could try to discredit you. Say you're lying, that you're crazy." "He can say whatever he wants," Caitlin replied. "I have Lily, and I have her drawings. Those aren't words. They're evidence. They're what she went through. And I'm sure there are other people he's hurt. We have to find them. We have to show that he's not just dangerous to us." Mark, who had been listening silently, smiled. "That's a great plan," he said. "It's risky, but it's the only way to win. We'll make him defend himself. We'll put him in a position he can't get out of." The next morning, as the sun was just peeking through the curtains, the team was already assembled. Mark, Liam, and Matt sat in the kitchen drinking coffee while Caitlin and Lily slept. They discussed the details. They didn't just need a journalist. They needed someone who wasn't afraid to go up against the powerful and wealthy Jacob. After much deliberation, Mark remembered his former classmate, a well-known investigative journalist who worked for a major independent publication. She was known for her integrity and intolerance of injustice. When Caitlin woke up, she saw that Lily was already sitting at the table drawing. Her drawing was of Jacob, but it wasn't the perfect father he portrayed in public. It was a monster with red, angry eyes and hands raised above a small figure. Caitlin cringed in pain, but then realized it was necessary. It was proof. It was her strongest card. Mark called his friend, a journalist named Elizabeth. He told her everything in general terms, without mentioning any names or revealing their location. Elizabeth was immediately interested when she heard about Jacob's behavior. She arranged a meeting with them at a neutral location, a small cafe in another city. When they arrived, Caitlin felt a shiver run through her body. She was scared, but her determination was stronger than her fear. Elizabeth turned out to be a young but very serious woman with a penetrating gaze. She didn't ask any unnecessary questions and got straight to the point. "Tell me everything from the beginning," she said. "Don't hide anything. I need to know everything to understand how we can use this." Caitlin began her story. She talked about her pain, her hope, her love for Lily. She talked about how she had tried to be a good stepmother, how she had tried to do everything to make Lily happy. And she talked about how everything had fallen apart in a single day when she saw Jacob's true face. She talked about his rage, his cruelty, his words. At that moment, Lily, who was sitting next to her, silently took her drawing and showed it to Elizabeth. The journalist, who had remained impassive until then, looked at the drawing and her eyes filled with tears. She saw in that piece of paper not just a drawing, but the soul of a child, her pain, her fear, her. Elizabeth took a pen and began to write quickly, recording every word Caitlin said. She had no doubts. She believed Caitlin. She could see that this was not a lie, but a cry from the heart. "We'll publish this," she said, "and I'm sure that after that, other witnesses will come forward to confirm your words. We'll tell the world who Jacob really is, but you have to be prepared for a backlash. It will be very strong." Caitlin looked at Lily, who hugged her arm. "I'm ready," she said. The days after the interview with Elizabeth dragged on slowly, like sticky honey. Caitlin, Lily, and the others were in limbo, waiting for the article to be published. Caitlin's phone was turned off so Jacob couldn't track her. She spent her time with Lily, helping her draw, reading to her, and just hugging her when she was scared. But even in the quietest moments, she could feel the tension hanging in the air. One evening, as they were all sitting around the table discussing their next move, Liam suddenly slapped his forehead. "How could we forget?" he exclaimed. "There was a photographer at the wedding. He filmed everything. He must have been right there at the altar." Caitlin's heart skipped a beat. She had been so consumed by her grief and fear that she had completely forgotten about the man with the camera. Matt nodded. "Yes, I remember him," he said. "He had long hair and was constantly walking around with a camera, snapping everything. He was hired by Jacob. I think his name was David." They quickly began their search. First, they tried to find him through social media, but his page had been deleted. Then they turned to Mark. Using his connections, he was able to find information about the photographer. It turned out that he had indeed worked for Jacob, but had suddenly stopped working after the wedding. Mark called him. At first, David was wary. He knew what they were looking for. He knew that Jacob was a very dangerous man. But Mark assured him that they were not a threat. He told him that they just wanted to talk about his work at the wedding. David agreed to meet them. They met in another, even more remote town, in an inconspicuous coffee shop. David was a tall, thin man with tired eyes. He sat across from them, clutching his cup. "Jacob paid me to forget about the wedding," he said quietly. "He said that if I ever showed anyone these photos, he would make sure I never worked again. He was very convincing." Caitlin looked at him. "Please," she said. "We don't want to hurt you. We just want the truth. Do you have a photo of that moment?" David looked at her, then at Lily, who was sitting next to her, holding her hand. He saw not only fear in her eyes, but also hope. He took an old laptop covered in stickers out of his bag. He opened it and, after searching through the files, found the photo. He turned the laptop toward them. The photo was on the screen, and it was even scarier than Caitlin remembered. It was Jacob, his face contorted with rage. His arm was raised, and next to him, cowering, stood Lily, her face full of fear. Caitlin saw not only Jacob's anger in that picture, but also his complete indifference to his daughter. He was ready to hit her, and this was undeniable proof. Caitlin felt a shiver run through her body. It wasn't just a picture, it was a moment. It was the truth, captured on photographic paper. "I couldn't delete it," David said. "I don't know why, I just couldn't. I hid it. I knew one day it would be needed." Caitlin looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "You have no idea what you've done for us." David smiled. "You're welcome," he said. "Just make sure he pays for everything he did, and for what he did to his daughter." When they left the coffee shop, Caitlin felt that they weren't just fighting anymore. They were winning. They had something no one could deny. They had irrefutable proof. Now they could fight him on his own turf, in the court of public opinion, and they were confident they would win. Caitlin, Mark, Liam, and Matt sat in the newspaper office. Spread out on the large table in front of them were printed photos with the same image in the center. The photograph in which Jacob, distorted with rage, raised his hand over his daughter. Elizabeth, their journalist ally, looked at it with undisguised shock. As a professional, she knew that words could be twisted, but a photograph was irrefutable evidence. "We're going to publish this," she said, "and not just in the newspaper. I'll contact my colleagues in television, we'll make sure the whole country sees it. We have witnesses, we have evidence. We'll show the world who he really is. Caitlin squeezed Lily's hand, who was sitting next to her, drawing in her album. Lily looked up at Caitlin and smiled. It wasn't just a smile, but a smile of trust and calm. And at that moment, Caitlin knew they were on the right track. The publication of the article and photos had the effect of a bombshell. The headlines screamed about Jacob's cruelty, his duplicity, and his willingness to raise his hand against his own child. TV channels broadcast reports in which Caitlin and Liam's friends talked about what they had seen. For the first time in a long time, Jacob lost control. The image of a loving father that he had worked so hard to build was destroyed in an instant. Jacob, who had been on top of the world, was now cornered. He tried to fight back, accusing Caitlin of lying and fabricating the photos, but his words sounded unconvincing. The public, which had sympathized with him just yesterday, now turned against him. Mark wasted no time. He immediately filed for temporary custody of Lily, using the article as his main evidence. He was confident of victory, and he was right. The judge, upon seeing the photo, ruled in Caitlin's favor without hesitation. Caitlin and Lily sat in the car on their way home. This time it wasn't Jacob's house or Mark's cottage, but their own home, which Caitlin had been able to rent with the money Liam had sent her. It was small but cozy, and there was nothing in it to remind them of the past. A week passed. Peace and quiet finally reigned in Caitlin and Lily's little house. The days were filled with laughter, the smell of fresh baking, and the sound of pencils sliding across paper. Lily became more open, and her drawings were now full of bright colors. She drew the sun, flowers, and, most importantly, two girls holding hands, herself and Caitlin. Their nightmare seemed to be behind them. But one evening, when Lily was already asleep, Mark arrived. His face was serious, and there was a look of concern in his eyes that made Caitlin's heart sink. "We have a problem," he said, placing a folder of documents on the table. "Temporary custody is one thing, but official adoption, that's something else entirely. The law is not on our side." Caitlin felt the world she had worked so hard to build begin to crumble. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Jacob is Lily's biological father. To terminate his parental rights, we have to prove that he poses a systematic threat to the child's life and health. Our only evidence, our wedding, even though it was public, can be challenged. He can claim it was just an emotional outburst and he regrets it. He has money, he has the best lawyers, and they will use every loophole to prove he's a good father." Mark's words were like a cold shower. She looked at him in horror, realizing that their fight was not over yet. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. "We can't just give up." "No," Mark said. "We're not giving up, but we need a new weapon. We need proof of his systematic cruelty, his neglect of his parental responsibilities. We need to prove that he was a bad father not just that day, but his entire life." At that moment, there was a knock at the door. It was Liam and Matt. They looked tired but determined. "We found something too," Liam said as he entered the house. "We found someone who worked with Jacob. He told us that Jacob was never a good father, that he often neglected Lily, leaving her with a babysitter while he spent his time at parties and on business trips. He said Jacob was always selfish and only thought about himself." Caitlin looked at Lily, who was sleeping peacefully in her crib. She was ready to fight. She was ready to do anything to protect her. "What should we do?" she asked, her voice firm. "We'll dig deeper," Mark replied. "We'll find everyone who saw his true colors. We'll find everyone who can tell us what kind of father he really was. We'll gather evidence, and we'll fight for Lily until the very end." 5 years passed. The noise of the big strange world was far behind them, reduced to a faint echo. Caitlin no longer felt like a fugitive. She was a mother. The family she had dreamed of was not the perfect picture from her childhood, but a real, living, loving family. The legal battle with Jacob was long and exhausting, but they won. Additional testimony from former employees and nannies, confirming his systematic neglect of his parental responsibilities, was the final nail in his coffin. The court stripped him of his parental rights, and Lily officially became Caitlin's daughter. Jacob disappeared from their lives as suddenly as he had appeared. His reputation was ruined, his once impressive business collapsed, and he was left alone, surrounded by his own selfishness. No one wanted anything to do with him anymore. Lily was now 13 years old. She was a tall, slender girl with long hair and bright, lively eyes. There were no more dark figures in her drawings, only sunshine, flowers, and smiling faces. She was happy. She hadn't forgotten her mother, but now she had another one. The woman who had saved her, who had fought for her, and who loved her with all her heart. Liam, Matt, and Mark remained part of their lives. They weren't just friends, they had become their family. They came over for dinner, helped with chores, and their laughter filled the small but cozy house. One evening, Caitlin sat on the sofa watching Lily do her homework. The girl was so focused, so absorbed that Caitlin couldn't take her eyes off her. She remembered the day she first saw her, a small, frightened girl with a teddy bear in her arms, and she thought that everything she had been through, all the tears and fears, had been worth it, because now she had everything. She had a family,